So yeah, thanks for joining me, Alex.
My pleasure to be here.
Yeah, even though obviously the elements are against us.
They are this week.
Yeah, with Storm Eunice making a guest appearance.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, I know on LinkedIn there was some people asking like where you were from, because your accent is quite hard to pin down.
Mm-hmm.
So where are you from originally, Alex?
So I was actually born in a place in England called Barnsley, which, if you know where Barnsley is and what the accent sounds like, the accent is definitely not what my accent sounds like. But I was born in Barnsley, but the place where I say I'm from where my mum is from, is actually Sheffield, and my accent is also not a Sheffield accent either. But the reason for my accent is, growing up, because of my dad's job, we had to move around to different places and countries and schools every few years. And so over the course of that period of time, I kind of picked up the accent here and there, but mostly it was it was because when I was about kind of 10 or 11-ish, I used to get bullied by some of the older kids for having an English accent. And so I started to change my accent, and I tried to skew it more towards an American accent. And so for about 3 or 4 years, I had this kind of weird forced American accent. And after a while, I kind of realized that I didn't actually like the way I sounded, and that I was kind of betraying my English roots. And so I started to switch my accent back, but it never fully, went the full course. So it kind of ended up somewhere in between, I guess. So yeah, that's how I have this accent now.
Yeah. It's I think it's quite a cool accent.
Thank you.
Yeah. But what job did your dad do? What was your dad's career?
So he worked in tobacco, and his dad before him worked in tobacco, and his dad's dad before him worked in tobacco. And there was just kind of a more traditional sense of kind of working in tobacco, whereas when my dad was getting into it, it started to be that you had to travel a lot more and go to different places. And certainly the company that he was working for at the time, they ended up getting acquired in the late 90s by a bigger company. And this bigger company didn't actually have any offices in the UK. And a lot of their offices were kind of further afield in different countries around the world. And a lot of their workforce was kind of expats. And so in being acquired, obviously my dad became part of that company, and it meant that they said, hey, if you want to stay with us, then this is the kind of the way it'll work, and you'll have to travel and that kind of thing. And my parents kind of thought about it, and they said, yeah, okay, let's do it. Let's see where this job might take us. And I was 2 at the time. My brother was around 4. And so we ended up moving from Barnsley to Malaysia, and we lived in Malaysia for 4 years, then in Switzerland for 3 years, then we moved to South Africa for 4 years, then to Luxembourg for 5 years. And then by the time our time was up in Luxembourg, I went off to uni, and I came back to the UK, and now we're kind of coming full circle again. My parents are gradually starting to return back to the UK, but yeah.
Yeah. Did you think traveling and moving around at an early age has influenced your choice of career, being a wordsmith, copywriter?
I think it has, in a more kind of subtle sense. It's not something that I often, I suppose, give thought to or gave thought to when I went into copywriting, but I think it has, in the sense that, when I was moving around, I was exposed to a lot of different cultures and people from different backgrounds with different thoughts and opinions and kind of worldviews. And for me, that was something that was very interesting, because I'm quite interested in people and the way people think. I suppose that blends quite well into copywriting, but yeah, I suppose it kind of maybe subconsciously gave me this exposure to a wide variety of views, which is quite important when I go and start writing copy and thinking about how to sell a product, because you often have to think about, okay, what are people thinking when they see this product? What are they thinking about when they buy this product? What kind of preconceptions do they have about similar products that are like this product that's being sold? And there's all this kind of mental internal dialogue that's going on in their minds. And I suppose, having been exposed to a wide variety of different views and worldviews growing up, I'm perhaps better able to pick up on what those internal dialogues might look like. At least that's what I hope, at least, because it would certainly, I think, helps me in my copywriting.
Yeah. Would copywriting have to be tailored for each country? Like, if you were advertising in a different country, would the copy have to be tweaked to some degree? Do all the principles work the same in whatever country you're advertising in?
I mean, by and large, the principles work the same. So writing for a US audience and a UK audience, you can still use a lot of those copywriting principles. But I would say that the difference in writing does go a little bit farther than just kind of the words and the spelling. I think Stephen Fry actually put it this way, in the sense that when you watch an American kind of comedy program, the comedy is more focused on the American side. The comedy tends to be more focused on, the main character being the hero, and everyone else around him is kind of making the mistakes and having all these slip ups and having all these things happen. The hero is the kind of person that's kind of, the hero of the story. Whereas in the UK, the kind of comedy theme tends to be that everyone else around you is kind of the hero, whereas you're the person that has all the bad things happening to them. And there's kind of that difference in thoughts in terms of the UK. I think these days, as we're becoming more globalized, and there's influences that kind of skip across the pond both ways. But certainly, in kind of a more traditional sense, the US has always had this kind of more forward, like gung ho attitude, whereas the UK tends to be a bit more reserved. So certain kind of copywriting strategies that you kind of use for a US audience, sometimes I find have to be toned down a bit to a UK audience, because we're sometimes a bit more reserved and skeptical, and you just kind of have to make tweaks and kind of understand the type of audience that you're going to be writing for.
Yeah, interesting. Because I know in your bio you talk about ads and copy not being cheesy, and being sometimes, I don't know whether in some countries, like I always think of America as being a bit more cheesy.
Yeah.
Copy.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong actually in that sense, and I don't know, maybe I'll get a bit of flack for saying that, but there is, I feel, a lot of the copywriting kind of, I suppose, tactics, the very short-term kind of things that seem to be popular right now. A lot of them kind of originate from American influenced copywriters or American influenced marketing. It tends to be very kind of boisterous and loud and in your face. And in the UK, I don't think that always, I think sometimes in the UK, if we come across some, marketing which is super boisterous, loud, self-confident, it can be taken in the wrong way, and we can kind of think, oh, that person, it sounds super scammy or that kind of thing. So yeah, there's definitely the differences there between different markets. But having said that, some things, if you write for the UK market and you're trying to tone your copy down, it might not be strong enough for a US market. And of course, when I say all this, I'm painting very broad generalizations, and there's very different character types in both the UK and the US market. But in kind of broad strokes terms, it does tend to be more kind of boisterous, self-confident, very in-your-face marketing in the US as opposed to in the UK, where it tends to be a bit more reserved and pulled, kind of reined in a little bit. So yeah. I know what you're saying. I mean, you're a millennial, right? I think, well, according to my birth year, which is 1998, depending on who you ask, I kind of straddle that line between millennial and Gen Z.
Because weren't you a director of the Millennial Club?
I was. So that was a small little kind of movement, which I think, I'm not sure, what's happening with it these days, at least, but it was the kind of aim at the time was to get together young people with an interest in business and entrepreneurship and all that kind of thing, and kind of unite them and in many ways create this network of people who were able to kind of leverage each other's skills and help each other, and just kind of have a place to talk about that. I suppose that entrepreneurial journey as a young person, and yeah, so that was about, I'd say, 4 years ago now. Yeah.
Yeah. And being a millennial, obviously, you've only really known marketing on the net, on Google, Facebook, etc. Do you draw any influence from like old school marketing? From like newspapers and TV, radio. Do you have any? Did you study that when you studied copywriting, or has it all been to do with digital advertising?
Well, when I initially started, it was very much, studying what was very current in terms of what's immediately around me, like the very digital online marketing style of copywriting. But more and more, the more and more that I write copy, and the more and more that, I study marketing and look at advertising as a whole, the more and more that I'm trying to base it on kind of principles and things that, worked just as well 40 years ago as they did, these days. Because what I found is that generally the principles of marketing and advertising and copywriting, they tend to stay the same. Over time they kind of go in circles. Maybe they're slightly modified for the medium, the platform, the channel that you're running them through. In terms of the general principles, they kind of they stay quite constant. Even going back as far as the early 20th century, and Claude Hopkins and scientific advertising, and just the principles that he was sharing in there, which was so far removed from, like, he didn't even obviously know the internet existed at the time that he was writing it in the early 20th century, but like the principles that are kind of written in that book are still very much valid today. And so I get quite excited when I have the chance to kind of read and study more traditional, let's say, advertising or marketing resources, because it's a good chance for me to see the same principles that I'm using in a more digital sense, but see them in a different environment and see how they might work. And even one of the things that I find most useful even now is studying classified ads that you might see in a newspaper, where it's just kind of very short, just a few words like selling a product, because often those classified ads are some of the best ways to they're kind of the best forms of selling a product, because it's super snappy. It has to touch on a lot of different kind of mental triggers at any one moment, and they're some of just the best things to study in terms of how you can improve your copywriting, make it really tight, and communicate what you need to communicate in a very short amount of, or a very little amount of words.
Yeah, that's a good tip, isn't it? Yeah, classified ads are like are so to the point. There's no fluff. There's no room for any unwanted prose or unwanted words.
Exactly.
It just goes straight in for the straight to get gets the attention, gets everything in, all the ducks in a row. Would you say that studying? What do you think of like newspaper copy? Is that something that's worth studying if you're looking at copywriting? With headlines and the way that works.
So it's quite interesting in terms of newspaper copy, because newspaper copy, you're obviously very good at, the people who write the newspapers, they're very good at getting your attention and converting that, focusing that down the page so that you continue reading. But with newspapers, I find it's more a style of content writing, where it's a bit more like a blog post, where it's about kind of educating and gaining that curiosity and kind of leading that down the page. Whereas they're not necessarily trying to sell a product. You can kind of some newspaper headlines and what have you. But if you're really wanting to kind of dial down on improving copy, in terms of selling a product or response environment, then I would recommend looking at materials that are, selling a product, because the way that they might employ some of the same tactics, curiosity and what have you, and specificity, but kind of just generally trying to get people to read an article and educate them. It's slightly different in the way that it's employed.
Yes. And would you say what advice would you give to someone who, say is just starting a business and they are looking at what sort of copy to put on their website or on their Facebook posts?
Mm-hmm.
Where would you start with them?
Well, I would say, I think what stops a lot of people, or what puts a lot of people off about copywriting, is the fact that a lot of people think it's about the words on the page, and that you have to write Shakespeare and that you have to be a very good writer in order to make it work. And sure, if you can turn a phrase a little bit better than some people, then yeah, that's definitely going to help. But more so, copywriting is less about the words and actually more about the ideas that you're using. And even one of the grandfathers, they say, of advertising, David Ogilvy, he has this idea of I think he calls it world consumption, where you simply just you take in that's around you. So you read books, you watch TV, you just see all these different ideas that are around you, and you just consume it and you kind of store it in your mind. Because really, at its core, copywriting isn't about fluffy writing or the writing that sounds the best. It's about conveying and communicating ideas, and the more of these ideas that you can have kind of stored up there, the more that you can relate them to the product that you're selling, or use them to tell a story. And even just an idea like a kind of common idea, something like Spider-Man, that someone, kind of everyone knows. You can use an idea like Spider-Man to perhaps describe your product, because you can say this product is a little bit like Spider-Man in the sense that it does this and that. And that can often be a very quick way to, if people don't really understand your product, but they know who Spider-Man is, they can be like, oh, I see, because it's kind of like this, and this is how it helps me. Now, obviously, Spider-Man is not going to work for every product that you sell, but it's this idea that copywriting is more so about ideas and leveraging ideas than it is about writing really good words and being super eloquent in the way that you write those ideas.
Yeah. Do you think some people get because sometimes punctuation and grammar don't always exist in copywriting, do they? Or as we know it, the official rules. Sometimes, with capitalization, for example, and full stops, periods.
Well,
is that something that you found?
It's interesting, actually, because I found some copy, I know that I will be committing a grammatical error, but I'll still do it anyway because it might help the flow of the copy. And it might, when the reader is reading it, they're going to be reading it almost as they're speaking it. And a lot of good copy is, they say good copy is simply salesmanship in print. And so a lot of the copy, when you're writing it, the kind of best copy tends to be just copy that sounds like someone's speaking it, as opposed to something that sounds like it was constructed to sound like a book. And so when you're kind of when you're reading it and you're thinking about how you kind of want to make it sound, sometimes you will just you might leave out a comma somewhere where traditionally you might need to put a comma there because it's grammatically correct. But actually, when you're reading the copy and you don't want to make it, you don't want to ruin the flow of the copy in the reader's mind, you might actually, you might commit some grammatical errors. Now, obviously, you can't really go overboard with this, in the sense that if someone sees the copy on the page, they're going to pay attention after a while. If they see a ton of spelling mistakes and grammatical errors, that's probably going to, even if subconsciously, it's probably going to affect their kind of view of you. But I wouldn't say that if you're afraid of making grammatical errors or spelling mistakes and stuff like that, don't let that hold you back from writing copy, because you'd be surprised actually the amount of kind of spelling mistakes that you see in copy, and it really does not have an effect or any kind of significant impact on how the copy performs. So yeah, in fact, an interesting point is, particularly with Facebook ads, if you actually make a grammatical error or make some kind of obvious error in the copy or in the ad, a lot of people will actually jump in the comment section and try and correct it, which can actually be quite good for engagement, because then it kind of, you get more comments on the ad and it can kind of build a bit of traction. So sometimes it can actually kind of be beneficial, but I wouldn't advise that as a kind of strategy in a sense.
Yes, like a deliberate mistake in there. It's a bit risky, but I know what you mean. There's always a debate about how long a copy should be. Should it be long copy? Should it be short copy? Obviously, on some platforms, you've got no choice. Have you got any thoughts on it, on terms of how long copy should be?
It's even as a copywriter, it's kind of like how long is a piece of string kind of question. What I would say is, say as much as you need to sell the product and overcome the objections in the mind of the customer, and nothing more. Because you do have copy long, but it can also, just because it's long doesn't mean you have to cut it down, because it could be that it does a very good job of addressing each pain point and each objection that the customer might have. But when you're writing copy, it's important to keep in mind, especially nowadays, people's, especially on social media, people's attention spans are quite short. And I don't mean that in the sense of, people are very quick to say, oh, we have the attention span of goldfish these days and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is that on social media, people will click away from something like that if you don't kind of keep their attention. So you have copy that you're writing, always look to try and condense it and make it concise without losing the importance of the message that you're writing about, or the objections that you're handling, or the pain points that you're targeting. Say as much as you need to. And
yes, and is it a good idea to have another pair of eyes go over copy?
Yes.
When you've done it.
Yes, and I don't just say that as a
opinion.
copywriter, because even as a copywriter, it's good. I mean, I love having a second pair of eyes, because it's very easy, especially when you're the one writing the copy, to get lost in the forest because of the trees, and you get so ingrained in this copy that you only see it from one certain angle. Another pair of eyes in, they say, well, have you thought about this? Oh, I read this part and it doesn't actually flow that well, or yeah, definitely. I mean, there's kind of a point where I would say the copy can kind of suffer from death by committee, where you get too many people weighing in their options. But to have someone that you trust, with a good eye, perhaps they have a background in kind of marketing or copywriting. If you can find someone like that, just to say, hey, do you mind looking at this copy and seeing if it's all okay? Then that can be really valuable for making sure that your copy hits the mark.
Yeah, and that's one of your services, isn't it?
Yeah.
So where you will not necessarily write the copy, but you will go over the copy and check it out.
It is.
In addition to what you
as
writing the copy.
It is, yeah. So it's something that I quite enjoy as well. I don't know what, but I have this kind of, I really like breaking down copy and looking at it and trying to say, oh, well, have you thought about this? So yeah, that's something that I really enjoy as well, being those second pair of eyes.
Yeah, and I just sometimes ask guests like more random questions, just to get a taste of the person. Nothing too controversial. But what would you say was your favorite book?
In terms of marketing, copywriting, or just anything?
What, or it could be both. It could be both. Okay. If that one, if it did meet that criteria of both, but it could be in both. Maybe two then.
Yeah, I'll give you
favorite marketing book, copywriting book, and your favorite book.
Okay.
General book.
Actually, I'll give you three, because I just thought of another one.
Yeah.
So the first one, which isn't copywriting or marketing related, is a book called Chicken Hawk, which is about a pilot, a helicopter pilot in the Vietnam War, kind of towards the beginning of the Vietnam War, and his experiences of flying a helicopter in incredibly dangerous, life or death kind of thing. And for me, personally, that's something that's really interesting, because I'm quite interested in history and 20th century history, and war stories that aren't so focused on, say, the politics, but on the experience of the people that were on the ground, in combat and that kind of thing. So Chicken Hawk by, I think it's Robert Mason, I think, is the author of it. And yeah, that's one of my favorite books. I've read that probably 3 or 4 times now. In terms of the I said I had another book which I thought of, so I'm going to give you two business books. The first one in terms of copywriting is called The Copywriter's Handbook by Bob Bly. And the reason that I like this book is that it kind of goes back to what I was talking about before in terms of more what we were talking about, the traditional kind of marketing and advertising side of things, because what Bob Bly brings to the table is he's worked in that advertising space in the 70s, 80s, 90s, that kind of 20th century advertising space where it was print and it was more about the principles of copywriting, and there wasn't so much influence of the internet and all that kind of stuff. And so I think there are really good lessons to learn for if you're just looking to get like the principles of copywriting down, then that's a really good book, because it gives you just like what you need to know and like the basics to do a really good job. So that's one book. And the other book, which I thought, I'm just going to take a sip of water. A book which I read recently, which is about copywriting, but more about kind of business building in general, that I'm hoping to take my business in, is a book called Built to Sell by a guy called John Warrillow. And it's essentially this idea that if you're offering services, that you almost take this kind of the McDonald's approach. And I don't mean that in terms of like a lower quality or a cheap product or something like that, but in terms of this thing that you have the service that you offer, but you offer it as like a package, and it's something that you can people almost order from you as if it was a product, and it's not, you don't necessarily make a lot of changes to it. It's not necessarily bespoke each time that you kind of do it. You have this system which works, and then when someone comes to you and they say, okay, I'd like to get this result, you say, okay, awesome, well, I have this product which is essentially like a packaged service that you kind of offer and you kind of just implement for them, and it can get them really good results. And I'm not explaining it as well as obviously he would explain it in the book, but it's got some really interesting kind of insights in there as to building a business. It's initially about building a business that you want to sell. Obviously, I'm a long way away from that point, but I think it has some really interesting insights as to kind of creating good offers and building a service business. And it's also written quite well as well. So Built to Sell by John Warrillow.
Yeah, no, I get the concept, definitely. Favorite music?
Oh, that's a question, Mike. Honestly, it really depends on my mood. Let me see if I'll my liked titles. I'll just go through some of them on Spotify. So I have some Doja Cat on there, if you believe that. Ty Verdes, John Denver, Queen, 10cc, Jim Croce, NRBQ, wow. Nicky Jam, Hozier, Bastille, Gabrielle. That was another banger. So yeah, it's really kind of wide, and it really just depends on my mood. And what I have this weird thing where if I like a song, I'll just kind of put it on repeat and just listen to it for kind of a week or two until I get really sick of it. And then I'll find a new song and I'll do the same thing. And then eventually I'll come full circle and I'll return to that first song and listen to that on repeat until I get sick of that. And then the cycle just kind of starts anew.
I'm so the same. I do the same thing.
Yeah.
And favorite food?
Again, it depends on my mood. I think we're having fish and chips tonight from the local chippy. So that's going to go down. Yeah, that's going to go down a treat. But I do love Italian food. I love Thai food. In terms of probably cooking food, though, I would say Italian, because there's just so much that you could do, and like adding different ingredients, and it becomes a whole new dish. And of course, Italian food is very tasty. So yeah, I would say favorite food to eat. That's too much of a broad question. I could go on for ages, but in terms of favorite food to cook, I would probably say Italian food.
Cool. So you touched on it a bit. So what are your plans for the future?
Well, at the minute, I am alongside kind of client work and keeping that kind of side of the business ticking. I'm also writing a book at the minute, which is about offer creation. Because as a copywriter, what I've seen is that you can write really good copy, but part of the equation of having a successful campaign is also having a really good offer. And I've written obviously I'm not been in the business like 20 or 30 years and dealt with a huge amount of, huge businesses and offer types of what have you. But over the past 3 years of copywriting, I've, dealt with a lot of different offers in different industries for different audiences and selling different products and that kind of thing. And I've come to realize the kind of what goes into creating a really good offer that people really like to buy. And so I'm just writing a book about that at the minute, where it'll kind of go outline, what makes a good offer, how you can craft a good offer in your business, and a few things that you can do to kind of help make that offer stand out from your competition. So that's something I'm working on at the minute, and a kind of another avenue that I'm looking to explore as well within my business. And I'm also looking to do a bit more traveling. Obviously, these past 2 years haven't been that conducive to the travel scene. So I'm hoping to kind of explore more of that, going forward. So yeah.
Yeah, cool. And if someone wants to inquire about your services, what is the best way to contact you? How do they get with you?
So I would say the problem with my name is that it is very generic. There are a lot of Alex Moores in the world. So if you try and look up my name, you probably go on a wild goose chase trying to find it. But if you want to reach out, just to chat about copy, if you want some ideas, or if you just kind of want to share a series recommendation or a good piece of music, I'm happy to chat. You can reach out to me at alex@ajmcopywriting.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Alex. I think you have your LinkedIn link that you can kind of put, and I think mine is linkedin.com/Alex-James-Moore. So yeah,
I'll put that in the show notes.
Yes, and
when it's published.
Also, as well, you can put this in the show notes as well. I put together a series of ad copy templates for Facebook that people who are listening to the show, they can go and check out and download. It's free. So I'll send you the link to that, and it's essentially just some ad copy templates that you can use if you're struggling to write copy, you don't really know what to write. You can kind of just lean on these templates and pick one out and kind of use that. So
fantastic. No, that's brilliant. I appreciate that.
No, my pleasure.
And we've come to the end. Thank you very much. Thank you for a very interesting interview.
No, thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed myself.
And we haven't been stopped by Storm Eunice.
Thank goodness.
Which is the good news.
Good.
Okay.
Good.